Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of Shastrartha on the Cārvāka podcast. As always, it's your host Kushalmehra with another exciting panel. Today's subject is the status of women in modern India. So, as you know, with the series, we try to talk about issues that, as I always say, nobody wants to talk about in the non-left. So today we're going to be talking about the different facets when it comes to the status of women in India. We're going to use different lenses. We're going to be using the lenses of psychology. We're going to be using the lens of traditional Hindu views, maybe modernity, even post-modernity. And we'll try to look at it from different views. And the aim of this discussion is not going to come to a homogeneous view. The aim of this discussion is going to present a multiplicity of viewpoints where every panelist is going to come from a different point of view, where we will showcase maybe where we made progress, maybe where we are lacking, a lot. And that's the whole aim of this exercise. It's not to beat India or beat Thaptapana. None of the aims are there. So, the panelists. I don't even need to introduce any one of them. They've been on the podcast many times. So let's start with the first panelist. First of all, Smita, thanks for coming. So I'm going to start with you. So Smita, my first question to you is, so let's define what equality and empowerment means to begin with. And once we define that, I want you to talk about how social pressures are impacting women mentally. What are these psychological impact on the women because of these social pressures?
Thank you, Kushal, for having me on this podcast. You'd asked me to speak on the status of women and also the mental health impact. I'd like to tell the viewers first that I was bullied into talking in this podcast because Kushal threatened that if I didn't come online, I would be bombarded with TikTok videos till I conceded. So that's disempowering already. But having said that, I'm very happy to be speaking to all of you today. Status of women, as I see it in India, is an evolving thing, right? We are a country of 1.3, now going on 1.4 billion. There are no absolutes. So we have, on the one hand, the most regressive practices and women with very limited agency. On the other hand, we have immensely powerful women. And then there is a million shades of grey in between. I would like to talk a little about my personal journey as a woman in order to explain my point of view. I come from a part of India called Assam. My mother comes from Meghalaya. Meghalaya, as many of you know, is a matriarchal society. Assam, the status of women is very different from what the others, especially in northern India, may have experienced. So for me, gender was never actually an issue as I was growing up. It's only when I went to college with LSR, where we started discussions on gender. There were gender workshops, there were various people who were talking about the experiences of other women across India. And for me, that was the first eye-opener, that my reality was not the only reality, and there were multiple realities which were less than ideal. So all the privileges that I had taken for granted all my life suddenly became something that I began to question. The second part of my journey was my mother. She is my icon, my anchor, and to me, she is the definition of the word feminist. And which is surprising, and I wanted to share her story, because my mom is the kind where if I wear a sleeveless dress and I drive at night, she'll say, take a dupatta and cover your arms. The other day, we were going out for dinner with my in-laws and I was wearing a dress. And Mama had come over and she was telling me, you forgot the bottom. First time I didn't hear her properly. I didn't understand what she was saying. Next time again, she repeated, you forgot the bottom. I said, no, Ma, I didn't forget the bottom. This is a dress. And this is how I'm going. She said, but you're going with your in-laws wearing a dress and showing your legs. And that's when I threw a fit. So that is one part of my mother. The other part of my mother is a woman who in her early 40s lost her husband. Only thing she had was 3 kids, 1 in college, 2 in school. She had never worked outside of the home. Pampered wife where everything was done for her at the drop of a hat. And she had a mortgage flat and a car and 3 kids to look after. And this woman, I don't know where she got this enormous well of strength. She told my grandparents, I'm not going back to Assam. My children are Delhiites and I will raise them here and I will figure out a way. And she did. She made investments, she made homes. In fact, her investment skills are better than my father's could ever have been. On top of that, at the very onset, she told the family, I will not follow any of the widow rituals. My children have lost a father, they will not lose a mother as well. So she continued to wear her pearls and her chiffon sarees and her high heels and her lovely lipstick. And that's how she raised us. And therefore, she's my icon. Now, the question that I would put to the panel and to you, Kushal, and to your viewers is, does she fit in the traditional definition of a feminist? Food for thought, isn't it? Because on the one hand, this is a woman who's telling me how are you showing your legs when you're going out with your in-laws. And at the other hand, every single decision that she has made since my father's passing has been about power and empowerment and leading by example and fighting against enormous odds. So I think the story of every woman is very layered, and we tend to put very black and white definitions, and that's unfortunate. Because no woman's story, even a woman that you see as a victim, is actually black and white. And that's something I think we don't give enough credence to. Anyway, moving on, talking about feminism, I think in India, a lot of the problem comes from the fact that we follow our feminist jargon and our definitions from the West. That is not to say that feminism as a movement didn't do enormous good. It did. Feminism started as a way of demanding equal rights for women, equality of contract, equality before the law, the rights to vote. And then the next shift was about ownership of your own body, where women said, listen, I am no longer my husband's property. My children also belong to me. My body belongs to me. I have equal rights to treatment. I have rights to my reproduction. So that was the second kind of conversation. And then you had women demanding rights in the workplace, the right to go out and work in the workforce. Once having made that journey, demanding equal pay, demanding respect, demanding freedom from sexual harassment, and so on. And that battle continues till date. But somewhere along the line, these definitions, we've attained a lot, but somewhere along the line, the whole definition has become confused. Because if you were to ask me today, what is the feminist battle for? Unfortunately, I'm not sure I can articulate it, because the voices that have hijacked the movement are angry voices, shrill voices, hysterical voices, which are more about rage and anger, about othering, about hating another gender, about victimhood, more than empowerment for the women. And that is unfortunate, and I hope my other co-panelists would be able to elaborate on that more. For me personally, what is feminism and what do I want all women across the board to have? For me, the foundation of feminism is equality. And what does that equality mean? Equality means right to life. Just because I'm a woman does not mean you kill me at inception. I have as much a right to live as any other human being. Equality to me means right to equal opportunities. Equality means equality before the law. Equal pay for equal work, equal treatment within the family, whether it means adequate nutrition, same education, healthcare, inheritance. Equality means financial independence to the extent possible. And above all, and I think this is where a lot of the modern debate flounders, above all, it is the freedom to choose how I wish to live. It means the freedom to love, the freedom of profession, the freedom of opinion and choice. And I repeat, this is where we have confusion, because somewhere we have started to interpret this freedom of choice as an imposition. For me, freedom means freedom from opinions of everyone, be it male or female. I am not willing to escape from so-called male tyranny into the clutches of tyranny of other women. So even when a woman comes around and says, oh, how dare you not call yourself a feminist, or how dare you shun the word, I think that too is tyranny, because what you're in effect doing is you're labeling me, you're shaming me, and you telling me what I must think. So how is that any different? And I would like every woman to actually sit back and think, what are we doing here? Are we actually empowering women when we make statements like that? Are we actually giving her agency? Or are we saying, leave that way and follow my way because my way is the right way? Okay. So that is where equality goes. And I think because we have shortage of time, I will move on to the second part of your question, Kushal, about the impact of mental health on gender stereotypes, etc. I will quickly, first of all, from my perception, the kind of things that women in India struggle with are color. That's a big one. And, we are a country where fair and lovely is endorsed by superstars. And no matter how much political correctness we have over the issue, let's face it, we are a very skin color obsessed country. And that is so deep seated that it will take at least another generation to overcome. I'm not going to go into how it started because that's for other panelists perhaps to discuss. So we have the color chip, then we have the beauty chip, because the man, especially if you see matrimonial alliances, the man can be a ganda, it doesn't matter. But the woman has to ascribe to a certain concept of beauty. Her hair has to be a certain way, she has to look a certain way, she has to sound a certain way, she has to have certain qualifications, and we're very, very constricted by that. And that again has consequences. The third handicap that women face is opportunities. In the metros, across India, and even in the tier 2 towns, many parents, many families, as they get educated, as they become aware, they give better opportunities to girls. But even today, the opportunities are not always at par with men, and even today, in many families, the end goal of a girl is to get married and to have kids. And that is a message that is embedded so deep that, again, it will take us some time as a society to move on to the next level. Also, till date, there is a disbalance when it comes to property and inheritance. And that is a handicap for women because it takes away the social security network, which some men take for granted. Um, it also means that our women don't have social support. Very often you have people asking, why are women stuck in bad marriages? Why do they take this kind of abuse? Why do they tolerate so much? Well, sometimes they don't have any other option because their family of origin has told them that they cannot come back once they've been married. This is getting better, but is still a reality for many, many women across the board. So this was a quick checklist. We can elaborate on these as we go along. But let me tell you about the impact. The first impact that this kind of conditioning and the subliminal, messaging that comes from across the board is your self-esteem. We have a whole generation of women who think they are never good enough. You may be a PhD, you may have an IIT, IIM, you might be a superwoman at work, but somewhere there's always a voice in your head saying, okay, maybe I'm a good worker, but I'm not keeping a good home. Maybe I'm keeping a beautiful home and I'm a kick-ass worker, but I'm not a good mother. And this voice of self-doubt and this low self-esteem shows up in multiple ways. The second thing is with our look obsession and our fairness obsession, we have constant comparisons. And this results in a lot of toxicity internally, and it manifests in envy, it manifests in pettiness, it manifests in pulling each other down instead of celebrating other women's achievements. It manifests in moralizing or sanctimony. And somewhere the root of this is it's a defense mechanism because you face so much nonsense that you feel good only by pulling somebody else down. The third impact that I see is guilt. I am surrounded by women who are super women. These are women who are educated, attractive, articulate. They tick all the boxes, and very often they work twice as hard as the men that they're married to. But I see in them this constant need to prove that they're a superwoman. There is no respite almost, because they're managing the home, they have to manage the extended family, they have to manage the child, they have to look like $1 million, and yet there is a voice in their head which is saying it's not enough. I never see a man going through this kind of crisis, and because he's never had these kind of expectations thrust upon him by society. All of this, what does it lead to? It leads to stress, a feeling that you can't win. You're on a hamster wheel, and you just, no matter how hard you try. So, I can tell you from my own experience. I went back to work when my firstborn was a few months old, and I had two kinds of constant pulls and push. I mean, there's your own guilt and there's your own sadness about leaving your child alone with the nanny at home. And then you have neighbors come and tell you, oh, your child was looking for you. Oh, your child was crying. Oh, your child was unwell today. You still went to work. On the other hand, you have women, when you take a break saying, oh, but I thought you would do something with your life. You're wasting your education. You're wasting your life. So this constant tussle messes your head. There is a confusion. And very often you have women, no matter how competent they are professionally, they are not secure in their own skin. They need this constant validation. And there is stress and anxiety and resentment and anger and depression and self-loathing, which manifests for many people in many ways. So to me, when I see this new brand of young, aggressive feminists, who are shrill and angry and perpetually dictating, who are hating men, who are, completely into the victimhood mode, I think some of it stems from this confusion about their own identities and where they stand. I am hopeful that as women get more comfortable in their own skin and as men shape up and begin to take more responsibility within the family, and as social mores change, women will feel more settled, and hopefully there will be some form of a balance. So that's my bit for now. Over to your other panelists, Kushal.
All right, that was amazing. So now let us go to Padma. Padma, there is always this tussle between the modern and the traditional, and nobody needs to tell you that. You've been a wonderful spokesperson for the Sabrimala movement. I mean, we've had an amazing discussion on Sabrimala ourselves. But so here's my pitch to you, Padma. So when it comes to traditional values, right, how do they reconcile with what we popularly call modernity today? Um, on one hand, we all know, right, the societal moral arch, it keeps on expanding. So let's say some things were excluded at a point of time. Now they're not. But there is still that tussle between the traditional and the modern. So how does one fight for women's rights, or for, if we don't want to use the word equality, you can use any other word that we feel comfortable with, but how does one balance then the traditional and the modern in this expanding arch, Padma?
Namaste, and thank you for having me. And namaste to all the other panelists. I think it's a tough act to follow up after Smitaji has spoken. I don't have quite as many fleshed thoughts about feminism in India per se, but your first question about traditionalism in the modern times, I would say traditional values are always timeless. The values that have been inculcated in us through our centuries, through our through our heritage and culture, they are timeless values that will stand the test of any number of modernizations that could happen. But what has changed is how we display those values, how we implement them in society and in family and all those things. That has changed because probably after many centuries of invasions, we were ruled by other, people who did not share the same kind of a cultural background or the same kind of values or something like that, many centuries of invasions. Then when we decided to become free, we decided that we are going to choose a democracy for ourselves, that we are going to be ruled by a certain set of rules which will fit everybody who has come in, who has changed their culture, who have become atheists, whatever. So we have chosen to accept democracy, and that would mean that the basic premises of many of those social diktats that were applicable before the times, what many classic traditionalists would say that still should be implemented, that still should happen in society, are no longer relevant because we don't have a Kshatriya ruling us. We do not have a Raja who is supposed to deliver the justice as it is prescribed in the Shastras. We do not. We are marching to a different drum now. And that is a reality that probably all of us have to accept. I have, and in this world, in this new world, I would say that I separate myself into two people. I am a spiritual person and I am also a transactional person. So the person that I am who goes out to the world and transacts with the world is bound by the laws and the reality of today. And our traditions also give us the option. And you must have heard that many of our smritis, they keep on saying that it has to be updated according to the Kala and the Desha. We have options of gurus and acharyas who have constantly reinvented the values to accommodate the times that we live in. And that is probably what is happening in most of the traditional homes right now, where people remain very rooted in their spirituality and in their spiritual spaces. Like, that is also one of the reasons why I'm very vocal about temples and spiritual spaces staying away from the government, because they cannot be secularized. But in their spiritual spaces, they can practice whichever form, the most puritanical, the most orthodox, the most conservative, whatever form of spirituality that they have. But when we interact with society and when we send our children out to interact with society, we have to help them to adapt to the reality that is today, keeping them grounded on those values. Now, how do I see, the struggles of equality and feminism and all the issues that Smitaji spoke about? I mean, where do we start? But to me, every step of progress in the feminist, in the women's equality, in the women's rights, in the women's rights movements have started by addressing those areas that the governments can intervene in. If we keep on speaking about the happiness of people or how mentally they are being repressed and all those things, we are unable to create a framework which will address it. We then place the entire onus of responsibility for a woman's happiness on somebody else, on an external factor, on her family, on the men, on whatever it is. Instead of that, I would say that address every single point where the government can legislate and help women get semblances of equality in terms of every part of their life. See, for example, I would say that when we were looking at the Minimum Wages Act and for some of the daily wage issues that we had back in Kerala, the wages are decided on the basis of gender. And the minimum, some of the wages are skewed so that the women get paid less and the men get paid more. And the logic is the women do the gentler work, the less strenuous work, or whatever it is. That was the logic that is being told. So I would say that instead of making it a gender division, why would they not change it to a division of the tasks that you do? So then you take the gender out of the equation, and there is no question of somebody saying that, you are a woman and hence you are going to be paid less, right? This is something that is implementable, thinkable, that would create an impact at the core level of if a woman wants to climb a coconut tree. Like I'm talking about the example of Kerala. If a woman wants to climb a coconut tree and if she wants to develop the skill to do that, she should be paid the wages of climbing a coconut tree and not the wages of to be paid to a woman, just because, these are the things that are transactional that could be implemented. And during the conversations with a lot of people, I mean, I disagree with a lot of them. I think though outwardly I'm branded as a traditionalist, I have a lot of discussions with traditionalists about certain things and why certain things do not change. And Smitaji spoke about property rights. That's another thing that, it is actionable, immediately actionable. A woman who gets married is obligated to take care of her in-laws. If that does not happen, the husband can file a divorce on grounds of cruelty. And, she has no option but to do that. But the woman's parents do not have the same rights. So again, in the property and inheritance rules, the woman retains the right to have a share in the ancestral property, and also the right, if in case of widowhood and abandonment, to go back to their maternal home and seek protection. So in the village homes of not so people who have not become so educated or progressed or whatever it is, in those homes, the question is, I only have obligations towards my daughter. I get nothing in return. Whereas my son is punished by law if he does not take care of me in old age. There is a law that the government has passed which said that the men should take care of their parents at old age, and they can be arrested if the parents can complain and things like that. It's a very simplistic viewpoint. It's a very, but that's how the villagers speak. And that's the question that was asked to me, and I said, oh, right, that's right. This is a systemic problem that creates probably a percolating effect where, the women are counted as less by their own parents. Because in the grand scheme of things, some of those people have those selfish motives of being taken care of in old age. And, this girl is not going to be. So in my opinion, when we talk about fixing things for women, the implementable aspects need to be spoken of more. And all the other elements, the mistreatments about looks, the slies and the innuendo that happen in workplaces, the guilt of having abandoned women, and all those things are intangible, not measurable per se, and the correction of those have been vested in somebody else's hand. So we are always looking to somebody else to change their ways to accommodate our emotions. And I find that, that kind of a narrative doesn't pull. And unless, to me, I think because I have grown up in a matrilineal family, my relatives, everybody, and people who have studied with, people who have grown up with, there have been exceptions, of course, but most of the men in our life have been willing to take those steps if we are reasonable. There are no perfect equations in real life. I mean, you live with you're married, you don't like everything that your husband does. You don't like everything that your wife does. It's never a perfect equation. It is never something that is absolutely, in brilliant terms, score 10 about husband behavior, score 10 about wife behavior. You make adjustments, you have a working relationship. In society, that has to happen. And when that has to happen, when people are expected to change their behavior, especially we are expecting men and elders to change their behavior towards women, the conversations have to be entirely different. The petulance, the anger and the rage and the constant attacks do not work, in my opinion. And, see, in my opinion, it does not work for any issue. I am somebody who can talk endlessly without getting, into rage or anything, because I find that is more effective. And I feel that as a society, we need to, as what was branded in Twitter as the united sisterhood of whatever women, we should adapt that strategy to say that we are not going to get petulant, but we are going to say that, look, you are good men, and this is all that we are asking. These are actionable points that you do. And let me be a little sexist when I say it here, that you need to clearly define it for men. I'm sorry, women have this habit of talking in very vague terms that we each other understand, because we come from the same level. We are emotionally in that same level. Men are not. So probably we need to modify our conversations. We need to have the eye on the goal and all these distractions and all those things. And, some of the conversations I cannot get on board with, like, the regret the day after is rape. Things like that, I personally cannot get on board with, because as a traditionalist, many of the things that are being demanded, because my life view is always that the pursuit of individual's happiness is secondary to your duties and responsibilities to your family and your society. And that's probably the core of the traditional values that my parents have told me, that, you always come second. So I think there are a lot of those things that in those conversations are making me uncomfortable as a woman, though I understand where they come from. And I understand that, young women in schools, in colleges are being bullied, their spirits are being broken. And it is a pandemic of sorts. There are people who are getting depressed. But we also should understand that there are a lot of men who are depressed, a lot of men who are committing suicides. They are also passing through the same kind of not the same, probably different kinds of issues which is affecting also. So they are not a perfect lot of people, or they cannot expected to be a perfect lot of people, because we also have our flaws. So this is my approach always towards feminism. But on, I always say that the government, wherever the governments can legislate in a sensible, coherent manner, that is what will achieve our long-term goals, like suffrage, like right to vote, right, like body rights. All those things were legislated, made mandatory, and in unequivocal terms, and it sounded fair to everybody who read it. So that brought about the natural social evolution that we are craving now. So that's my viewpoint.
All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. So now let's go to Pratyasha. So Pratyasha, here's what I wanted to start with you. This is where I get confused, right? We hear a lot of things that A has happened, B has happened. There is a postmodern view, there is a modern view, there is a traditional view. But at the end of the day, I've always said this when I have my discussions, and in fact, even when you and I had a podcast once, I think it was last year or a year and a half ago, even at that time, if you remember, I always insist on, let us put objective standards. Let us look at things from a perspective of a mishmash of modernity and traditionalism. Fine, that's not my problem. But what does the data say? I don't know what the data says. Whenever I go to people and I ask them, "Bhai, data bata do mujhe kya ho raha hai? Just give me some numbers at it." I just draw a blank, and that bothers me. So, what are your views? So, what do you think is the current status of affairs when it comes to women
Thank
in
you,
modern
Kushal,
India?
and it's been a pleasure listening to the first two panelists, and I'm sure this discussion will be really great. I'll take some time to talk a little bit before going into the data about what exactly is a Indian form of feminism, or how could we talk about it, because that was something we did not touch upon the last time when we talked. We talked about where the construct of feminist theory arrives from, and that's a very Eurocentric lens that we again apply, which is pretty much what Smita ji summed up in her discussions. But the Indian understanding has gone through a very solid grounding in dharma, particularly the area I come from, the area Smita ji comes from, Assam, Bengal, Odisha, the Shakta belt, which we call that. The idea of Purusha being the still, the constant force, and Prakriti being the dynamic force, the fluidity and the constancy coming together, and that being sort of, the way in which Jagat, or the world, moves or survives, is very intrinsic to our understanding of femininity and womanhood. So it's not different from our bodies, our Stri Swarupa or Purusha Swarupa and Dharma coming together, and that defines our essence. So we come from a philosophy like that, where the idea of being a woman and femininity and womanhood is worshipped, it's celebrated, to the point now where we are sort of debating what is purity, what is pollution. How did we come from there to here? Some things must have happened in between that has resulted in this flux. So the thing which has happened in between is, again, what Padma ji talked about, is this entire century long invasion, colonialism, and that entire period of flux. And it's not just that external influence, but also the period that we have taken to come to terms with it, which is equally long. In that period, because the colonial project itself is like a religious project, you cannot sort of distinguish colonialism from the very clear idea of spreading a particular religious view. That is why the family became very core to the change in the colonial project. The family became very, very important. And when we talked about that, along with the Westerners who came their form of enlightenment and their form of progressivism, which brought in that Victorian morality, which we till now see. The last sort of thing, not the last, I'm sure, but then one of the recent things we saw was what we were seeing in Article 377, the dredges of Victorian morality or so. But then that created another flux. Post that, during this period itself, there were a lot of social reformers who came in. Unlike the Western countries, a lot of the reform movements in India were actually led by men. And that also creates problems of its own, because some of them borrowed ideas from the West, and then they came from the male perspective of reforming women and showing them the light. So that again was another sort of nuance that is there in almost the colonial and post-colonial project of reforming women and bringing in like a native sort of feminism. And after that, we had like a glorious phase, I would say, with women being very core actors in the freedom struggle, and particularly in the drafting of the constitution. Because even with all the faults that our constitution has, it's a wonderful piece for women of this country, because it gives us a lot of rights, which probably came from the period and the flux that the world was going through at that point. But the constitution arms us with a lot of these legal protections that makes the fight towards equality of access and opportunity a lot easier. So that sort of in a nutshell is the sort of trajectory that we have followed. After that, there have been a lot of very progressive legislations. Some of them, if I count, consider the Maternity Benefit Act, the previous one, not the new modification, because at that time when Ambedkar brought it in, it was extremely revolutionary that your role as a mother is acknowledged while keeping in mind your role as somebody who's contributing to the economy. Then the Shahbano case, again, sort of a watershed moment in how we understood how rights of women in this country is constructed from the opposite direction, but still a watershed moment. And personally, to me, one of the biggest things, which I would also consider maybe like, I don't know, the biggest contribution of Congress to India till date, the 73rd Amendment and what it did to women at the grassroots and how it helped them get political power. So a lot of changes have happened, and the status of women has changed dramatically. But while we are talking about it, it's very important to understand that even relatively, if we have like a small percentage of women in that extremely vulnerable position, in a country like India, it cannot be ignored, because the ripple effect of that is extremely big. So when I'm talking about some of these figures and statistics and numbers, please understand that it's not an attempt to generalize and say that nothing has been done since independence. A lot has been done, and we are in a very different position from where we started. But I'm particularly going to talk about those sort of, corners that we choose to ignore or probably play down because we want to look at the larger picture and let those go. So I'll talk about 4 things. I'll talk a little bit about education, health, the economic aspect of employment, and a little bit on crime. So one of the things about education, one of the figures that recently I think came out in the SRS survey of 2017-18, there was an interesting statistic. It was that so they were trying to look at what is the percentage of boys and girls who have never enrolled in school. Never at all. So when they looked at what percentage of boys and girls have not gone to school because of financial constraints, the percentage of girls was somewhere around 15%, and for boys it was around, girls was 13%, boys was around 15%. But the next question they tried to ask was, what is the percentage of, these adolescents who have never been to school because they were engaged in economic activity? And there, it was 12% of girls and 2% of boys. So what does this sort of data show us? That there are a large number of adolescent girls who have to make that choice very early in their life about whether they have to go down this particular formal education route, or do they have to go by their familial responsibilities and take on the role of being a caregiver very early. Because it's not just them, it's their mothers, their grandmothers who are going through the same cycle of drudgery. And if they go through this school education, then probably that part of it is lost. Then there were some other figures which stood out very interestingly. The percentage of students at this present moment who are enrolling in school and who are completing matriculation is probably at an all-time high. So it looks like 81%, nearly 81% of both boys and girls are completing matriculation. But what is happening at the higher education level is it's somewhere around just 8% women who are going up to that graduation level or beyond, while it's 13% men who do that. So some days back, I was seeing like a side discussion about this happening on Twitter where people were saying, but what do you mean? Girls may be choosing this. Of course, some may be choosing this, but we sort of choose deliberately to ignore that it's probably not coming out of that much of an agency-driven choice that I don't want to continue. So when I was working in, I did a RCT study in Koraput early on, I think around 2015, where we tried to look at why girls drop out of school and why girls drop out of college. So some of the reasons would astound you. Something as simple as passing through a basti where boys stand, because that's the way they have to take to get to the school bus or any bus. And when the boys like catcall them or do eve teasing, that immediately brings like a drop in their confidence and they would not go to school because of that. So do you think that these sort of reasons are applicable to boys of that age? Probably not. These are some pressures which are very, very pertinent just to girls, and probably you need that lived experience to go through it. So from this, I'll take a segue into health. So what happens then to these girls who are probably dropping out in class 8 or 9 or 10? And what then is the next trajectory of their life? Currently, the NFHS data says 40% of women in the age group of 19 to 49 years have been married before the legal age. That means they have been married before they turn 18. And 1 out of 10 rural women become a mother when they are a teenager. That means again before the age of 19. So this is exactly what happens to these girls. And it's not because they are just dropping out of school, because there is that expectation of girls getting married early, because it is sort of the responsibility of the parent to do that, activity early on and get done with it. So that is one vulnerability, the community norm associated with it. And then, of course, there's material poverty, which pushes the age further down. So the poorer you are, probably the quicker your girl gets married. And once this girl gets married, she's immediately, like, without any information on sexual practices, without any orientation also into what managing an intimate relationship looks like. Again, we assume because our grandmothers did it, everybody would do it. Everybody will just figure out how to, be with a man, manage even the act of intercourse. It's so traumatizing for girls. This time in Gorakhpur, I talked to girls who were married at the age of 10 and they are 18 now. And those girls told me that they didn't have their periods till then when they had to consummate the relationship. And because they couldn't talk to their mothers about it and there was no mother-in-law, it was pretty much what the husband did to you. And in our language, it would count as rape, but for them, it was just consummating a relationship which they had no idea about. So it's sort of pushing them into that, that abyss without the necessary tools to deal with it. Because you need a certain kind of emotional maturity also to manage these intimate partner relationships. So what happens then is you find you go have sex, you're young at that point of time. The entire load of contraception then comes on the woman. Because again, it's a very not for me, but I don't know if others would find it surprising. Less than 6% of men in India actually are willing to use condoms. Yeah, because it's the safest method of, planning your family, protecting yourself, but they wouldn't use it. And there are a lot of behavioral reasons why they don't, starting from pleasure to mental models around what masculinity is. So for this young girl who's probably 16, 17, the entire onus of contraception is now on her without any information. So what she's probably going to do after that is have the first pregnancy because there's no way to do anything about it. And after that, ask somebody, like if her Asha tells her, she gets to know about pills. or else she has no demand for contraception. So she'll rely on the trust between the partner, like, okay, he'll withdraw in time, or whichever other way. Or else, like the statistics says, 43% of women don't ever demand contraceptives in their lives. There is no need for that. Yeah. Is it leading to bad health outcomes? We know about that. Of course, family planning in India has been successful to a very large extent because of a very strong institutional push from frontline workers. But till we address this very strong gender dynamic operating within households, it's going to be very difficult bridging that gap. Moving on a little bit more, when this particular girl now has kids and she's probably working in, like, outside her house, or she's a MG Narega worker, or she's working in her husband's small farm, once the baby is really really young, she has to again make that difficult choice about whether I continue working or whether I be a mother, because there isn't like enough social safeguards, and not just like externally pushed, but also within her family to manage that caregiving load. The mother-in-law, when she's present, she'll probably do it to a certain extent, but caregiving for the infant child, partly because of biology and partly because of like very strong other gender norms, is exclusively the work of the mother. So again, another interesting anecdote from my fieldwork in Rajasthan. We were talking to young fathers there about infant nutrition, and we asked them, do you hold your baby? Or like, when did you hold your baby? So the men tell us, and these are a lot of men, not one or two men. So they tell us, पापा के सामने बच्चे को पकड़ेंगे तो शर्म नहीं आएगा, इतना बेशरम थोड़ी हूँ. So the idea of holding a baby or being a caregiver for a man in many areas is still considered emasculating. And it's not the problem of the man. That's what they've seen. That's what they've seen their father do. That's what they've seen their grandfather do. And it's sort of passed down. And that is why when it comes to dividing the responsibility with the wife, they are more than, like, most of the times they are not there. And again, when I'm giving you these examples, because I might get a lot of flack, I'm sure, it's not what everybody is doing. These are some things which are operating in some areas, which is making women vulnerable. And this is one of the reasons why 60% of women are out of the informal workforce now. And with this COVID crisis deepening, it'll probably increase a lot more. And it's not just that, like around 83% of women in India are in the agricultural field. So feminization of agriculture is a huge thing, but they don't own lands. Less than 2% maybe own lands, because the idea that women can own land and be a farmer is still very alien to people. And we have seen that it's not income, but asset ownership that protects women from a lot of domestic violence, improves the nutrition ability or nutrition capacity of their family. So the more women have assets in their hand and the more they spend, they make more decisions towards the health needs of the family, while it goes in the opposite direction for the man. So these are some of the things which are happening. And then the last part, of course, is crime. I wouldn't give any facts and figures there, because I think we've talked a lot about this. But what's very interesting is, from like the safer confines of social media to the very unsafe space that homes could be, power is used in a way to dehumanize women. That is the essence of domestic violence or any sort of sexual crimes against women. It starts from making jokes about your body, sexually laced arguments, calling you baby, darling, this, that in offices. Everything that is tagged on to your sex, starting from dehumanizing arguments to dehumanizing acts to sexual crimes, is meant to chip away at your essence as a human being. And that is the big problem that we face today. So tying all this up, you will see that there is a common thread in all of this, which is the gender dynamic or the gender role in families. And this is pretty much, this is a commonality with what the second wave feminism in the West also said, that a lot of gender relations, a lot of the way in which we navigate gender roles in our personal space is problematic. But the big problem arises because not all families are the same. That's why you can't just say the solution to this is doing away with the institution of family, or toppling the institution of family, or calling all men as dogs, or saying marriages are things of the past, because that is denying a lot of the lived experiences of women, particularly women in colonized countries, where we draw a lot of our power from our family structures, from our social structures. It may be inhibiting at times, it certainly is. And with these strong gender norms, like in behavioral science, I work in behavioral science, a norm is as rigid as the sanction. So the stronger your punishment, whether it's a monetary punishment or it's stigma or it's social ostracization, the norm sticks that much more. And if it continues for that long, you don't even need to have those punishments because it's introjected. You have internalized it. That's why nobody needs to keep telling you. You keep following that up. And that can be interpreted as choice. That's the problem with it, where choice isn't really coming from your agency, but a long history of sanctions and this sort of very constraining atmosphere. But the idea at this point, which is very important, is instead of falling into that narrow hole of thinking of every family as the same and every institution as problematic, because we are a colonized country, we have to take that much time again to unravel what's happened. Because for a long time, we haven't even had these discussions of what colonialism could have done to us. So now that we are talking about it, it will take some time to understand whether my view should be the one which is heard more, or Padmaji's view, or Nayanika's view, or a guy's view, or somebody else's view. So that negotiation has to happen. And while that is happening, we'll keep hearing things like, you pseudo-feminist, you feminazi, you this, that, because nobody will agree to that. It's a process where we are unraveling a lot of these complicated thoughts. So to me, to end this, there is one aspect though, which we all can converge on, which we all can agree that could be a common thread. And that's the last one I talked about, the dehumanization of women's bodies and sexuality. So gender violence and gender-based discrimination by treating your body as a battle. That is the problem, because there is no choice in that. All things are choice. You work, you don't work, education, health, you want to go to a treatment center, not. There is a sense of choice in all of that. But to degrade a human being just because she's a woman and cause sexual crimes or call her names because of something else is probably something all sane-minded people can absolutely coalesce upon. So maybe once we are going forward, irrespective of where we stand on the political spectrum, ideology, religion, whatever, maybe this can be one common thread that can tie all of us together, and that can be a starting point. And the rest of the churning will anyway happen. That's part of the decolonization process that we'll have to go through. It's happening for caste, it'll happen for feminism, it'll happen for all modern discourses which have been navigated through that period, right? So this is, I think I overshot my time by quite a bit, so I'll stop there.
No problem. You don't need to worry about that, at least not on my podcast. There is the question is not whether the time limit is short. The question is whether the point is made, and you made your points brilliantly. So now we go to Nayanika. So here's my question to you, Nayanika. Let's talk about feminism. The much sullied word, the much abused word, the much, I think, in my view, and I remember my podcast with Pratyasha when we had discussed feminism, and at that time we obviously were talking about it. We were discussing feminism at a very theoretical level. But my question to you, Nayanika, is something different. Every time, and I'm going to be tongue-in-cheek here, we drop the F word here. And this is not the other F word which we are used to listening to. This is, you see people cringing, people holding back, people resisting. No. Oh, we are not Westerners, But my point is that there are certain universal norms, right, Nayanika? There are universal standards. Human beings across the board are born in a certain way. Human beings across the board are used to certain hierarchical existences. How do we know that? Well, we can read human evolutionary history. We can just see how human societies have come up. And yes, we might find hunter gatherers, and yes, I know there is this romantic element, and we have the Rousseauian image of the noble savage, and then you have the Hobbesian image of maybe Pinker and all those people. But the point is, in your view, why do you think there is so much resistance in the Indian discourse to just the terminology of feminism? Like, why do you think we face so many problems when we talk about feminism? Don't you think we have a place for it in Indian society?
Hi, Kushal, and thanks for having me on again. Are you able to hear me all right? Yeah. So I guess talking about why is there so much of a backlash to feminism, there are a few things here, and one is, I think really it's a discussion on what feminism is, and it means different things to different people. For me, the basis of it is something that I once read, and I don't remember who it was who said it, but I don't. The saying goes, I don't know what a feminist is, but I know I get called a feminist whenever I express any opinion that differentiates me from a doormat. So, and I think that's actually true. Anytime any woman ever wants to stand up for herself or for other women in any way, that makes her a feminist. And going back to what, and nobody I think is a perfect feminist. We are all on a journey of uh, of some sort, and I think all of us are probably, including you, Kushal, are feminists in their own way. So looking at the other, so looking at, you said, why is there so much of a pushback against it? One of the things that I've often thought is that India seems to have had everything from first wave to fourth wave come all at once. And that might be because it's such a big country and it's such a diverse country. But nobody, but nobody seems to have the same view on feminism. So there are places like where Pratyasha said, and some of what she said. For instance, I remember as an intern watching children dying of malnutrition, and it's something that you have to see as a doctor in rural India. Unfortunately, the children that are going blind from malnutrition, the children that are dying of malnutrition, they're almost always girls, and the parents will try and feed the boy at least enough to keep him alive, to keep him and to be able to see, to be able to function. But when it comes to the girl, it's just not there. There's not enough food for her. There's not enough money to send her to school, and and a large part of our country is still like this. A lot less than when I was an intern, but it's still there. The and and you have that, and on the other hand, there are people that are talking about, for instance, trans rights and intersectionality, and some of it does make, and a lot of it makes sense to me, because all that intersectionality means, for instance, to me, is that if a woman is a Dalit woman, you look at what it is about her Dalit identity that makes her especially vulnerable, as the what makes her especially vulnerable. Why is it that, for instance, a Brahmin woman is not as vulnerable, although both are vulnerable? Most sexual assaults, most rapes, the data says that they're still on women of a lower caste. So I think some of that does make sense, but I think a lot of people who talk about feminism in India and on social media, they're talking about uh, they're talking about a reality that most people don't know. They're talking about say, for instance, there was an article not long ago on a women's magazine on Twitter, which talked about how women have the right to masturbate. Now, I'm not arguing that women don't have the right to masturbate, but I would ask if that's the most important thing that you need to talk about when women don't have the right to a full meal and don't have the right to an education. So I'm not disagreeing that women that sexual rights are important as well. So I think some of it is that uh, people are just on two different sides of the ocean and they can't see any connection to what the other is talking about. But I think the other reason, is that, and this is something that has happened in all colonized countries. When I read Chimamanda Adichie's work some time ago, and it was called "We Should All Be Feminists," and she mentions that, well, she grew up in Nigeria, and she mentions there as well. They've had a lot of a common experience with India because they have an old culture as well, and they've had colonization. And there as well, a lot of people would tell her it's not an African thing, it's a Western thing. And I actually remember reading that Rajiv Gandhi, of all people, who married an Italian woman, said that, oh, feminism isn't an Indian thing; it's a Western idea, and he dismissed it. And so it was all right for him to marry a Western woman, but he would dispense feminism like that. And besides that, so I think that's still what most people think, that it's a Western idea, and I don't actually agree that it is a Western idea either, because I don't know enough about Africa, but in India there have been women through the centuries. You look at the Vedic sages like Gargi and so on, up to the medieval period. Like, one of my heroes is a woman called Kona, who and we still read a book of her sayings, and her story is quite important because in the end, her husband and father-in-law get fed up with her making prophecies, and and she gets upset and she cuts off her tongue, and she never speaks again. And I think that's a great example of what happens to women when they don't have support in what they are doing. But we've had warrior queens, we've had all kinds of people. So and when we had queens, they must have had a right to property, and it's something that we should, and it's something that we need to understand, that often, especially when you talk to Muslims, they say that women had no right to property before Islam, and that's actually not true, because it's there even in the Manusmriti, it's there in it's there in other shastras, that Indian women have always had a right to property. The fight weave and that Indian women did not have a right to property under the earlier Hindu succession acts and so on. That was actually a take on the Victorian Inheritance Acts, and not so much from the Hindu uh, succession laws and so on. So, which brings me to the other point, that it's natural. So that's the other thing. It's natural for us to be suspicious of anything that we see as coming from the West, because early, as Pratyasha said, a lot of early Indian feminists were men. Ram Mohan Roy and Dayanand Saraswati, all the reformers, they were all men. But we need to remember that uh, a lot of the wars that were fought, like women, in order to educate themselves, they needed to have male support, like Anandibai Joshi and so on. She could only study because her husband and father-in-law were so much there in it with her. The other issue I think we need to acknowledge is that there's this idea is that everything is going to be a zero-sum game, that if women are going to have rights and something will be taken away from men. And I think in some cases, yes, that is true. Like your father only has one house. If he gives your sister half or one third, then you don't get the whole thing. And it doesn't apply to everything. A lot of it only means that you have to give a certain amount of respect and regard to what a woman is saying. It doesn't take anything away from you not to harass a woman, not to catcall a woman. It doesn't take anything away. So often people will say, by the way, why should I respect a woman because she's a woman? And I don't think that's what any feminist says you have to do. All that I would ask is that you only respect, you only just don't disrespect a woman because she is a woman, and that I think would be enough. So what I'd like to, so I think those are the main reasons that there's a pushback. I noticed that, for instance, in other countries as well, the men's right movement, which pushes against a lot of the rights that women have achieved in the last few decades, is particularly strong in countries that are that have been colonized, where women have been which are more traditional, and yet they say and do things that would not be acceptable in a traditional society. Like it would not be acceptable in a traditional society to talk about raping a woman who didn't follow the rules. And yet, because of westernization, they feel they can say that, but they feel able to threaten a woman who who also expresses Western ideas about that. So India, Pakistan, countries like Kenya and Nigeria, the backlash against women's rights is probably more in the mainstream and stronger than it is in say New Zealand or Canada or similar countries. And I still think that at its root, we need to see feminism as the belief that men and women are equal. Radical feminism also talks about overthrowing the patriarchy, and I think we need to also understand that patriarchy doesn't mean we're talking about killing all fathers or getting rid of all fathers and so on. It just means getting rid of a system which is built to benefiting and accommodating men. And a lot of people ask, do we still need feminism? And one of the things I think is that the figures after these last elections were that Indians, it was the highest number of women ever to sit in the Lok Sabha, and that was still 14 or 15%. And if you consider that out of half the population, out of 50%, there's only 15%, surely that means that there's something wrong. My answer isn't that there are quotas or similar. My answer is that surely there's something happening somewhere along the way that we can try and change. And if we do that, so if women start to have more advantages from childbirth or from birth, from before birth, really, considering that the male to female ratio at birth is still really quite high. So many more men are still being born so many more boys are being born than can be explained naturally. And at every step, if women are not being pushed back, they might be able to make a 25%, a 30% in 10 or 15 years' time. And I think at some point we will be able to say that you don't need feminism anymore. It it was a good thing and we needed it at the time, but we're not there yet. We're still really at a level where, talking about the stages of feminism, we're still at the stage where either we think of ourselves as victims and we either think that there's nothing we can do about it, or we think there is something we can do about it, but we're not really sure what it is.
All right. So, Padma, you wanted to make a point about some of the things that Pratyasha spoke about in regards to some of the data points in from your experience in Kerala. So, why don't you share that with us?
See, Pratyasha ji spoke about reproductive, knowledge, child marriages, about nutrition, about the taboos associated with men handling children and all that. I grew up, entire my young life till I was married. I lived in Kerala till about 21 years. So from that time, I understood. And when I moved to Chennai and then to Telangana, there is a core difference that I understood is that the deliverance of governance is what is creating these severe gaps in, even between states of the same country. The rules, the framework, everything is available. The actual delivery, the penetration of these rules and these benefits that are aimed at bettering, the lives of everyone, not just women. But when a woman's life improves, the whole family's life improves, is an example that we have amply seen in Kerala. The delivery of government machinery is probably causing many of those societal issues there, because I have seen in a village, my in-laws live in a proper village. There is an Anganwadi, the Asha worker is prompt, she is compensated promptly. There is an outreach, the panchayat works, there is help given whenever there is a domestic violence case, whenever somebody is getting married. Because villages in India are still very closely knit, everybody comes to know about what the other person is doing, and so the Asha worker invariably knows on the second day if something is happening in somebody's house, and she is there. She is not attacked. That is something that the government, the panchayat and the police are ensuring, that the Asha worker moves into the family to talk to the girl who's going to get married, is not attacked. She is protected. That is something that only the government can do, because there will be different types of resistances that come because of whatever equations are at work. In Kerala, Asha workers are attacked too when they go and try to give vaccines. The delivery, the government machinery's delivery is something that is lacking. But when I moved to Telangana with a young child, and I had sent my son to Anganwadi in Kerala, because I felt that that's a very enriching experience for him, because kids from all walks, they play in the dirt. It's a very basic setup, but it's brilliant. So when I moved to Telangana and I went into the Anganwadi here and tried to say that, look, can I enroll somebody else, because my son was big by then, and it was appalling. The infrastructure, there are funds, right? There are funds for Anganwadis, there are funds for panchayats, there are funds for everything. But appalling, there were no walls, auto rickshaws were parked inside. So whose fault it is? It is the fault of the government, that existing systems which are aimed and perfected to deliver a certain kind of justice, a certain kind of quality of life to everybody in the villages, have failed. So that is to address that is pretty easy, in my opinion. To address such a problem where the solution is in front of you is very easy. Why are we struggling? I have not understood this at all. Why are we struggling? In Kerala, you go to every ward of every electoral ward has at least 2 self-help groups, one for the men and one for the women. And if you go to any government bus stand, health center, any of those things, you will find that the canteens are run by those self-help groups only. So they have employment, if somebody, this MNREGA, that daily wages scheme, the women are empowered, the women and men are empowered to say that, look, I want so and so amount of money, number of days, this is what it is, where is my money? Whenever there is a loan scheme announced by the government, I have seen it, that, the women come and say that you have so much of land. Shall we take it on rent and say that we are going to plant pineapple because we are going to get 25,000 rupees from the cooperative. It is they who come forward and say that, look, this is how we are going to do. Now, in the government in Kerala, because politically I'm not aligned with them, the government in Kerala through the years have spoiled it, because the women working and getting empowered has generated a lot of income and, all those things. They have spoiled the whole thing by making it, an alcohol-centric economy, where, the men will go and grab all that money and go and drink and lie on the road flat. So that has sort of counterbalanced what has happened. But these things, these senses of equalities, and it's very, very sad that, I'm talking about in the 80s, when I was growing up, I was seeing this happening. So it's very sad that in 2020, we are talking about villages in Orissa or Rajasthan or anywhere where these basic things, which are easily deliverable, have not reached. And the struggle of those women to achieve equality, is set back by many decades, just because we have no will to implement whatever is already there. So this is what I wanted to add, because we have seen it done, and these are the kinds of things which I feel are addressable, rather than the other aspects of, if a woman is going to, if a girl is going to college and she is being whistled at by a set of boys. If the women in that area are empowered, if they are working, if they are sweeping the roads, if they are running a canteen, if they are running a thela or a pan bandi, they are going to stand up and say, look, stop whistling. I think the upliftment, the economic upliftment, the physical health-wise upliftment of women will bring all of this as a domino effect. These effects are going to happen if the basics are fixed, and we are still not able to, is a sad part. But this is what I wanted to add about Pratyasha's thing, because I have seen it happen, and I have seen the contrast when I moved to Telangana, because there is a midday meal scheme for the children and for pregnant women, that everybody gets a certain amount of nutrition. In Telangana, it's a packet of some powder. God knows what is inside that. I don't think we'll give it to cows, that powder. But it's a powder which the Anganwadi lady says that you mix it in water and you drink it. Whereas a glass of milk, 2 eggs a week, a proper meal, and all those, if a woman is pregnant, she walks into an Anganwadi and she is fed. In many of the panchayats in Kerala, because, depending on how urban, semi-urban and all those variations, but in most of the villages. So this is happening, and there is a huge gap between states itself, leave alone about between men and women, between states itself, how women are treated. And I think it's all, this is something that I really wish would happen, is that when women are empowered in those ways, the other social elements of, because if I were catcalled when I was walking to school, because I lived in a very semi-urban area, and if I was walking to the bus stop, if I had a problem in the government bus, it was always the women that, I looked at, and they would come and say, look, go and sit in that seat, I'm going to, and they'll start addressing the issue or whatever. So that will naturally happen. So that is what I wanted to add about what Pratyasha was saying.
All right. So Smita, you wanted to make a point.
I actually wanted to add to something that Padma said, and that struck with me, especially because I see it in my work. She had said in her opening statement that there is no perfect equation, and I cannot appreciate this point enough, and I cannot stress this point enough, because what we see in this confused state right now is there's this competition that is set in, and it's almost like couples and partners are keeping scores. You cannot run any relationship based on a scorecard. You can't say, okay, I tick this box and you tick that box. Today I do this. Everything is a give and take. Sometimes the man does more, sometimes the woman does more, depending on the circumstances, depending on the stage of life, and it's okay. And if we do not recognize this, there is going to be conflict, there is going to be confusion, and there is going to be the kind of anger and the resentment and the lashing out that you see. To give you a concrete example, I have women come to me and say, okay, you know, a woman who's not working outside of the home, uh, she resents the fact that her husband's working outside. She resents the fact she's the one who's doing the dishes. She's the one who's looking after the family. Yes, from one perspective, yes, you know, he gets to go out and have the fun. You're sitting at home and doing these roles. But my counter question was, is that the only choice you had? Or is that a choice that you made because that security came with a lot of other benefits? A village woman being forced to make that choice is another factor because she doesn't have the choice to go out and make, you know, to work. But for a city woman who has made that choice because she gets a few comforts and then does this competition, you have to have some kind of balance, right? What I see happening is a lot of women in this confused mode of equality have given their locus of control away. Everything is external. But what about me? What is the control that I have? What is my responsibility? That is a conversation that seems to have fallen by the wayside. And that is a conversation that we need to have with our daughters, with our friends, with our family members, because otherwise there's going to be this constant unhappiness.
All right, Pratyasha. So now over to you. So I wanted to, because let's talk about the general innuendos, general comments, general jibes, or as a fan of mixed martial arts, I always like to say, you know, the jabs. You know, people make jabs. It's not a full-blown punch, but there are jabs in life. So what do you have to say about the jabs that we constantly watch everywhere, especially on social media?
Yeah. So based on what I just said like 10 minutes back, the jab that I'm anticipating is why do you have to talk of what is negative and why not highlight all the broad changes that have been made? Well, I actually said it in the very beginning that we have come a long way since independence, and even since 2014 or 2005, if we take like a 15-year period, there has been phenomenal changes that we are seeing around us. The biggest change, because right now I'm working on global health, and one of the things that, even to what Padma ji said, one of the biggest changes that we see around us is how institutional deliveries have been pushed by the government. And that one thing has given so much power and so much sort of resilience to women, because reproductive health and the following, like maternal and child health based on home births, was such a difficult thing, and that sort of increased maternal and infant mortality rates quite a bit. But the sustained institutional push to get women to the hospitals on time and have them deliver there and make them stay there for 48 hours, is a phenomenal change. Another change, though I talked a lot about contraceptives, is again on family planning in India. Family planning, because of the sustained push that it's been having since 3-4 decades. India is doing a lot better than other developing countries, at least the ones, because I just completed a project in India and India, and I'm constantly going back to comparisons between the two countries. And in India, it's a very different thing. Of course, contraceptive usage is low. Of course, mental models of men around contraceptives is very difficult. There is a lot of change to do, but there has been a lot of progress made. So my thing is, if we have 1.5 to 2 hours to talk about problems of women, and even then we are so like jumpy about why are you talking only of problems and why can't you talk of good things? Why can't you compare with Pakistan, Afghanistan, Kenya, this, that? Why can't you talk of how things are bad in USA? We are here to talk of status of women in India. Let's, like, for 2 hours, I think we can do that, isn't it? The other thing that Padma ji very rightly brought up is something that we miss out a lot, is the factor of mobility, and how mobility is absolutely crucial to the decision making and agency of women. The fact that you can step out of your house unaccompanied, or maybe accompanied as your age progresses with different sorts of people, and access different points near your house, like starting from familiar places like a temple to slightly more alienating places like a bank or a post office, to slightly more like overwhelming spaces like a market these patterns of mobility are extremely important to get women out into the public space, because the more women we see around us, I completely agree with Padmaji there, that it brings in that courage to young, like it gives that courage to younger girls to step out, because you're seeing others like you around you. That is a big factor. So I would also say, again, coming from my example of just working in Kenya, I worked in a urban slum in Nairobi called Mathare, which is called the slum of women, because everywhere you see there are women there, like everywhere, like publicly they run markets, they own businesses, they do small stuff, big work. So it's women all around, but it has some of the highest sort of crime rates in Nairobi and in the country. So there is that dichotomy also, that it's not just physical presence, but a lot of the ways in which power is negotiated, right from the family level to the community level, that's influencing all of these. So while I understand that the institutional push can solve a lot of issues, definitely it can. Like a good ASHA worker can solve like maybe 75% of your problems in in the RMNCH journey, but she will still come to you for 15 weeks in your life. What happens after that? After that, you're still going to be dependent on your family for cues. You're going to need somebody else to give you that care-based support. And that when families stand up to that, when they deliver that support, then it's an easier journey for a woman. Then she can easily sort of get over the barriers that she had, and as her age progresses or as she has more kids, she can build that resilience and recover quicker from shocks. But till we address that, there are some things, while the institution being largely beneficial for women, there are still a lot of issues that need to be talked about. Till we at least acknowledge that, it's going to be a problem, because otherwise we will keep. And I get that point, like I said, because we come from that history of colonization where our traditions have been attacked again and again and again. We are really cautious about any sort of structure close to us being talked about in this manner. So it's understandable that it'll take us time. But the fact is that when it comes to outcomes, there are problems. And the minute these small tweaks are made, it's easier for women to navigate that journey. Does that require women to step up and say these things while being called feminazi, pseudo-feminist, this, that, and all those labels? Yes, that will be like the collateral damage that is needed, because some people have to speak. So, and if you feel like Indira Jaising said the same thing, you are saying the same thing, so you feminazi. I mean, what can we do about that? Like, if there is a point which two women are making, they are making it. I mean, we can't really say that. It's just like, I hate to bring this example, but somebody wrote, Hitler used to breathe and you breathe, so you are Hitler. It's that sort of an argument. Like, you take it down to very basic things and said, she said this, you said this, so left equals right. Like, this sort of things won't work. If there are genuine concerns with how certain traditions are being understood, like Smita ji would get it, in Assam and in Odisha, we have these rituals around menstruation. In Kamakhya, in Odisha, we just celebrated Raja Parva, which is about menstruation and menstruating girls. And the festivals are so unique that you don't even wear footwear, because you're like, the earth is menstruating and she shouldn't be disturbed. So that is the philosophy from which we engage in certain cultures. But what is it being understood as? It is being understood as purity and pollution. So in Kamakhya, when the temple is closed and no devotees are coming in, it's because of purity and pollution. It's not that. It's a very sacred energy that's playing up at that time, and that's the understanding of what menstruation is and what the reproductive powers of women are. So I think a lot of this, lack of a better word, the bastardization of our views which have happened, has led to this sort of very deep insecurity when questions are being raised. And it will be a period of flux. But till that point of time, we can have some common minimum goals that we can align on, irrespective of our gender. and the rest of the time we have to take like whatever is thrown at us, and if we have to speak. So like I told you the previous time, I prefer to speak without the label of feminism, because I can't defend the rest of the things I don't agree with, because that will take me a lot of effort to say why she said this, that. So I would rather speak the way I'm doing, minus any labels, doing like thinking whatever I'm thinking. If somebody else wants to do it some other way, that's fine. But then we have to at least acknowledge that there are problems, and the innuendos and all, it's part of the process. What can we do about it?
All right, so I'm now gonna get into the live viewerships questions. So I'm gonna start with the first one. This is let's start with Nayanika. I had to start with Nayanika with this one. That's how I am. So Nayanika, how do we hit the balance between empowerment of women and the abuse of privileges by women? Please share your views.
I'd want to know what kind of privileges he'd be talking about, really. And I have no idea, but
I have no clue. I've just asked the question.
Often people mean things like they get a compartment to themselves is a favorite point. And then I think, that it's a shame that women need to have a compartment to themselves. We shouldn't need to, but we have to, because it's the only way that we can travel safely. So so I guess, I mean, I don't really understand what other kind of privileges that he's talking about.
So let me play the devil's advocate here. Okay, I'm going to try to do the devil's advocate here. So I think everybody is going to come down to the 498A, that law, which I agree is honestly not gender neutral, and that's lopsided. So don't you think that law needs a little bit of correction?
I think really with 498, one of the issues that I have is that the same section, it covers all domestic violence, and it also covers dowry. And often what happens is that a woman accuses her husband or in-laws of cruelty or domestic violence, and people say, oh, it's not dowry. How can she say it's dowry? So I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding there. But even assuming that we're talking about the same one, in general, yes, I do think, and I agree that any laws, they shouldn't assume guilt. I think that's the basis of justice. But I also understand why it happens, and I understand that this is an issue which is more than, it's more than an issue with women. I think the main issue that you have with 498 is issues with the implementation of law in India, issues with the judiciary. Because if we had a system of law that functioned, even if a woman went and made a complaint, you should be able to go and make the complaint, and then the man gets bail if he's not a risk to anybody's life, and come out immediately. But that doesn't happen because the law doesn't really function like that in India. And I find it quite hard to work out. And I think this is why we have this situation. How do we have a law that allows women in danger to get protection and at the same time stop? I don't disagree that there are fake allegations in both rape and in dowry harassment. I think they're a smaller proportion than most people would like to believe. Like, for instance, the so-called fake cases in burglary are apparently 20 or 25%, which is higher really. And I think a lot of the issues with dowry, for instance, that I've seen myself, is that often people don't even realize that what they're making is a dowry demand. Like, they might ask for saris for sisters-in-law, or they might ask for the wedding to be held in a 5-star hotel. And these are things that people normally ask for in India, but those do run afoul of the Dowry Act, and I don't think most people even understand that. So they might think we haven't done anything wrong, but actually at some point they have. They've probably, a lot of people have. Yeah, I'm not saying everybody has. Like a lot of in-laws will have said, "Oh, you haven't brought anything," but we haven't said anything. You came empty-handed. My son could have got a car if he wanted, and these are just normal ways of talking, and yet they come under the dowry laws. So I suppose, I suppose going back to your question, how do you come to how do you get the seesaw to come into equilibrium? I think it's going to take a bit of time, and I think it's going to take also changes in the law and implementation. I don't think this is a case for individual women to be able to settle. You need a systemic change.
Okay, so now I'm going to follow up with Smita on this one. So, Smita, one more case which I have noticed, and I think I want to expand on this question a little more, is recently I had read somewhere that in India, I don't think so, they recognize the fact that men can be raped.
Yeah.
I think there is a legal anomaly here, and I was like, whoa, what the hell is happening here? How can you not recognize a basic concept as a man is simply he cannot be raped? So, but here's the problem. Now there are, so 498 is a solid case where there is some grouse, and I think that grouse somewhere down the line, like, you can't have any bail, there is no hearing, just utha ke ghar mein dal do. These are serious problems. But and then there is this point of bail. But how would one? So my follow up to the audience question is, yeah, I get these two are solid cases where men can actually have a genuine grouse, but the point is that if you're going to really put it down again, like I always like to put it down on paper, and when the rubber meets the road, it's like the asymmetry is still far more on the side of the women than in favor of men than let's say in favor of women. So what is your view on that, especially in this rape case?
Kushal, there are two parts of the question. One is about asymmetry, right? I have a problem with any law, and Nayanika, I think all women on this panel are at least on the same page, that you cannot have any law which presumes to provide justice, that presumes guilt without any trial. It fundamentally goes against the concept of justice, because innocent until proven guilty is the hallmark, right? So anywhere where you say, okay, there's an accusation and the man goes to jail, and after that it is for him to prove that he's not guilty, to me is a travesty, it's a perversion, and that needs enough debate, which is not happening right now. In terms of rape, yes, rape does happen. I know that for a fact. I have worked with clients, males who have been raped, and I have seen the devastation that it causes for the rest of their lives. It is not a physical act that just gets over, there's pain, there's trauma, and you get over it. No. It is as traumatizing for a man as it is for a woman. I have seen silly discussions on Twitter, and it makes my blood boil, because I have women who minimize the impact. Oh, but you couldn't possibly have faced the same trauma. How do you know? How are you to presume what another human being is suffering? I have worked in my clinic with people who can't have normal relationships as a consequence, whose entire concept of trust is broken for life, who face anger, they face flashbacks, they have PTSD, they cope with various addictions. And the sad part is that the society that is supposed to, the empathy that is given to a woman is denied to them, and that is like doubly victimizing a man. And I'm glad you raised this point, because we need to talk about this enough. Just as we talk about women's safety, we need to talk about men's safety, especially about children. बस ये तो लड़का है, ये तो ठीक है, उसको क्या होगा? That mindset needs to change.
All right, so now I'm going to ask the next question, and that I'm going to start with Padma. So Padma, here's the question by Apurva. He says, what are your views on the current discourse on women empowerment by organizations like Feminism in India or Pinjra Tod? Then he follows up, my view, that's his view. They don't want to smash Hindu patriarchy. They rather want to replace it with some kind of Islamo-Christian Western patriarchy. So what are your views on feminism in India, Padma, or Pinjra Tod?
See, the problem is when they say smash patriarchy and when they connect it to religion, it is my experience that wherever, especially Hindu Dharma, wherever there have been extensive discussions and open discussions where the acharyas, we have a culture of temples and prabhashans and pravachans and satsangs and all that, and where you get answers, you get the chances to, to raise your concerns and get suitable answers. This smash patriarchy thing does not register in our brain at all, because either you have the choice of asking those questions relentlessly till you get those answers. You have the choice of rejecting those religious practices that you don't want to follow because you did not get those logical answers. And if you are an empowered woman, what we have discussed before this, if you have got the empowerment, if you have been given by the government and by the society the basic independence to earn your living, to take your life forward, there is nothing that anybody can do without your own permission. But what feminism in India and Pinjra Tod and all those people want to do is to interfere in temples and spiritual spaces. Happy to bleed and all those people. When they come into spiritual spaces, I say that you are trying to address issues of mathematics with the principles of chemistry. That doesn't work. So this has been my consistent stand about this issue of smashing patriarchy, because I feel, because in my life I have seen around that people have successfully come above all those stereotypes and all those kind of Ruಢivadi kind of stuff that was practiced, which I feel is a corruption. Like all of the women here have said that our shastras, our society has been egalitarian. Nayanika spoke about Mata Gargi and Maitreyi and Lopamudra, and we can reel out examples and after examples, largely egalitarian. There have been misinterpretations, but we have always been given the freedom of individual practice, and they are trying to intervene into that and say that this is the source of all the problems. Then I would answer to them that show me those egalitarian societies which do not face the problems of rape or bullying or body shaming or any of those issues that women today are facing. Those egalitarian societies that they talk about, like Sweden or whatever, tell me that the rates of crime or whatever are totally different, and that everything is a land of milk and roses. The problem that I have with feminist discourse when it moves into the sphere of patriarchy is that they try to say that the religion is at the source of everything without proper study, without actually getting into the real points that need to be spoken, without actually understanding the language of religion, and just from an external perspective, they just keep on ranting about it. So I don't pay them much attention in my personal capacity. I would say that if there are sensible questions with respect to spiritual religious issues, people who have understood at least it halfway, then there is a lot of effort that we are all willing to take to address them. But somebody just doesn't understand the concept at all. My strategy is to patli gali nikal jao, because I cannot waste any effort in doing that.
All right, Pratyasha, you wanted to make a point, and after the Nayanika also wants to make a word. So Pratyasha, bolo.
Just a quick point to what Padmaji said about religion. Because I've been talking so much of reproductive health, a lot of the religious traditions and rituals which are there, if you look at it from the modern sort of RMNCH journey, they make such a lot of sense. So this time when I was in Bihar, I went during the period of Jitiya. And what I heard was all the women talking about how Jitya is a marker of, praying for the newborn kids and blessing them. And even before that, the previous time I had gone was during the puja for Sati Maya. Sati Maya, of course, is it's there. Shitala Devi is there in Bengal, Odisha. A form of her is worshipped as Sati Maya, and that marks like the critical postnatal period ritual, which is extremely important even otherwise, because now we are trying to think of behavioral nudges to make women realize that this is a critical period and this is how you avoid certain behaviors. So we were trying to think of a design solution or a quick nudge which would help them, get adequate nutrition in the antenatal postnatal care period. And then when we talked to like grandmothers, they were like, हम तो गोंद का लड्डू बना के रखते हैं, हम तो like we worship all these, we keep it ready for them. Nutritious food, rituals, which are all part of religion, are meant to mark those critical periods. So it's a very myopic vision to say that religion is alienating women from their true and real self, while it's probably like the opposite, where they get a lot of strength from it, and that is sort of their coping mechanism also when things are beyond their control. Of course, you have to intervene when it goes against modern science, or it is not complementary to but supplementary to that. When they sort of like, if there was a miscarriage and you say मैंने कांच को छू लिया तो miscarriage हो गया, something like that, without looking at like the real reasons behind that. But otherwise, if you look at a lot of our rituals, they have like extremely solid grounding in how the society takes care of a newlywed woman or a going to be mother, or at various stages in her life. And it's very alienating. That's why for a lot of these women, where you believe that they are being oppressed because of Karwa Chauth and this festival and that festival and that festival, and then but actually those women would laugh at you and they would call you like an alien for coming and like even articulating these ideas. So that was just the point I wanted to make.
All right, so Nayanika, you had a point to make, please. You're muted, Nayanika. You have to unmute yourself. Nayanika, unmute yourself.
I just wanted to say, you were talking about the fact that men can't be raped in India, and I think that as well, it dates back to British rule, because it's something that only changed in the UK. I know after Indian independence. I don't know when. So I think that's where it comes from. But I think, I've noticed that it's women who are more likely to be sensitive to issues around a man being raped, whereas I've heard men say, oh, come on, he must have enjoyed it or something, especially when it's, and some ones which I feel quite strongly about are when it's a teacher and those are the ones that we mainly hear about, teachers, and usually in Western countries. And quite often I've said, oh, it's really hard and really traumatic for this child. And the men there are saying, oh, he must have enjoyed it, and so on. And I think that is so wrong, because you're imposing your idea of masculinity onto a child. And this isn't just happening in one or two cases which come into the public eye. It's probably it probably happens a lot more often than that. And especially for a man to be raped is it's an absolutely emasculating thing, because most men are expected to be able to stand up for themselves, and it's not supposed to happen. But the other thing I think, is that this is an issue that needs to be talked about as a standalone topic, because often men who are talking about it will talk about it as soon as women talk about rape, and it's like, oh, it happens to men as well. And I don't think, that kind of achieves anything, because then no one is hearing what each other has to say. It's like you've thrown it at the woman with the hope that she won't talk about women being assaulted. That's not how that works. So we need to talk about this as as a standalone topic, and we need to take boys, especially young boys being sexually assaulted, as a serious issue. It's incredibly common in India, and I think a lot of your viewers would probably be shocked to know how common it is, but it is.
Okay, now I'm gonna take one last question. Pratyasha, this question is for you, and this was asked by Karan. So Karan says, have you seen the effect of the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan and Ujjwala or the triple talaq ruling anywhere in your groundwork as of now?
Triple talaq, no, but the other two things certainly yes. In fact, I think since 2015, though a lot of emphasis and effort has been put into the Swachh Bharat mission and publicizing it, I think Ujjwala has been a game changer in an enormous proportion. So I'll tell you, one of my first projects right after college was in the Western Ghats, and so we were doing like a biodiversity project there. And when we went to one of the villages, where so we asked them, where are all the women, because we've been there for like 3 hours and there are no women and only men are sitting there. And they said, she's gone out, she'll collect firewood, she'll get water on the way, and she'll come back. So it's like a 2 hour journey to and then back. So it's 4 hours on her feet on that like heavy terrain that she's going to walk, and she's going to get that firewood. And then because it is Western Ghats, and if it's monsoons and if the firewood gets damp, then it's not even like alternate days or 2 days in which you go. So you have actually got to go the next day also. So that to me like remained one of the big questions as to, and this was in 2012, I think so. So I was like, why? This is a simple fix. I mean, you don't have to introduce so much drudgery in their lives, where half of their productive day is gone just collecting water and firewood. And by that time, children are going to the schools. If the children don't go, fathers don't usually say anything because mothers are the one like after them to go to school. So the kids are running about or they are not doing anything. And the mothers, even in Tamil Nadu, I remember one of the ladies said, half my life has gone not looking at my kids when they go to school, because that's when I have to go and collect water. So these are very basic things which when you go to when you go and see people like facing this situation, it seems so different from what we as urban women face. And then it seems like these fixes are so simple. Why are they not being implemented? So post Ujjwala, I think I've done a couple of studies post Ujjwala, and it's fascinating because you can immediately identify. It's not that you have to do much to verify. It's right there. You can see it getting used. Of course, it's not 100% usage because firstly, people still have that preference for chulhe ka khana. That's one thing. The other thing is it's sort of become for special food items. So when I sometimes go and talk to people, they'll make chai on the new Ujjwala thing, the cylinder and chula, but food on the mitti ka chula. But at the same time, there is usage. It's there in every household, and increasingly, the drudgery from a day-to-day thing has become probably like a monthly thing or something. So if you want to cook, you cook. Otherwise, it's not like a daily chore that you have to go out and do that. The second thing about Swachh Bharat, again, implementation is not as close to what we hear. So, of course, we hear of ODF villages, but then, we know how it's calculated, how it's measured, and how many days does it take to flip around. But the big change, I would say, which has happened is the understanding of cleanliness that has seeped into like every discussion that women have. So when I was working on infant and child nutrition, and we asked them, what do you think, what are the basic things that you have to do to maintain the health of the baby? The first thing you hear is cleanliness. And this never, like earlier it used to be time pe khana khilao, saaf kapde pehnao, this, that. But now it's like actual things. Wash your hands 5 times. So everybody can say that, like the critical moments of hand wash. This is the way you clean the baby. This is the way you clean the house. So the idea of cleanliness has become part of the public communication, and it's very clear, it's unmissable. You might still see feces lying outside, and that's not because women do it. Women are not doing it. Women are not the ones who are going out and defecating outside. It's usually the men in the family who do it. But even the men in the family sometimes have other issues, because water is a problem, cleaning the septic tank is a problem, sometimes it might overflow. So those basic problems are there. But I would say that a lot of the schemes that the previous time, like the Modi one government did, even though it might not look like that, were oriented towards women, and they have resulted in a lot of improvement, and I think it will gradually keep increasing as time passes. At least in the health domain, we are seeing like a lot of phenomenal work done, and Ujjwala to me would certainly be one of the big game changers.
All right. So one last question, and I want all four of you, because this was a very good question. I thought this was excellent. So Ajay Prabhu has asked, do we need to, and I want to start with Smita. So do we need to reimagine the role of institutions like the Women's Commission? Or do you think they're doing a good role and they don't really need any, rejig or rethinking? So what do you think, Smita?
That's a complicated question because rejig means what? Are you going to change the basic framework on which it is based? Are you going to change the type of women who populate it? Are you going to make changes in the judiciary and the policing system that is to run in parallel? So while I would say that we need legislative changes, we need sensitivity in our legislature and in the policing thing, just merely changing a women's cell is not enough.
All right, Padma, what do you think? What do you think is the role of the Women's Commission?
I am for actually a complete revamp of that organization, because today it is populated by, I think it is in my understanding, I think it's populated by political appointees who are of a certain generation, probably not in touch with what is happening in a modern woman's life so much. They do not understand the challenges of probably somebody working in an IT company. They do not, probably understand the challenges of somebody working in a daily wage job in a village. They are somewhere in between. They are political appointees, and frankly, for many of the interventions that I have seen, quite clueless. And the second part of it is they are a reactionary organization, and which worries me. There is some complaint that goes in. There is out of 10 complaints, maybe 3 get addressed. The others are dropped. There are political and religious forces that are at play who influence the commissioner. They are easily cowed out by many of the existing political situations in the location. So I feel that the delivery, what was expected of the women's cell, is actually not happening. I have heard of a lot of those complaints that have gone, and people waiting for years for something to happen, and which were pretty simple things, like Pratyasha ji said. Though there are very simple things that can be game changers. Those will become those moments of history that that defines us before and after. And I think women's cell is something that can clearly play a part, but it is not. I would like it to become a more proactive organization or a group of people who will get into the society and actively seek out points of pain and address them, rather than being a reactionary force where they wait for something. And I really do not accept this political appointments that are happening because the State Commission for Women in Kerala recently made a very nasty statement. She said, if there is a woman accusing the party person of some violence, our party has courts and police. We will take care of it. My commission is not required. The Indian law is not required. Nothing is required. Our party is itself sufficient. And if you have a problem inside the party, you address it to the party only. Please don't come to me and expect anything out of it.
Shabash.
So, he's telling all the women of that particular party that she is part of that, you will get, if you ever hope of anything, And if it is somebody that is in power inside that party, you can imagine what justice she will get, the complainant. And she is very clear that, the commission will not do anything because, she has more trust in the party than in the constitutional body that she heads, which is, blows my mind. And I feel that, the whole thing should be just wiped clean and redone.
Nayanika, what do you think about the Women's Commission?
I'd say first off, I'd like to ask a question in return. Can anybody think of anything that the Women's Commission has done, let's say in the last five years, that nobody else did or was able to do? Can you think of one thing? And know the answer, no. So I want to ask then that's obviously there is obviously still a need for a women's commission, but a lot of the things that are being done, they seem to have no, I don't know what the right term is, there is no power behind it. Like often I'll see that I think it was KRK or somebody had made one of his usual comments on Twitter, and KRK, the actor, and the Women's Commission sent him a notice to appear in front of them. But the fact is that, as far as I'm aware, they can't enforce that. They can't do anything about that. They can just ask him to go, and of course he won't go. He's in Dubai, but even if he's sitting right there in Delhi, you can't force him to go. So what is the point of having that kind of a commission which can't enforce something? And I think it has to be more, as I said earlier, there has to be a whole change in the policing and judiciary systems, and the Women's Commission has to be a part of that, because otherwise it's just another layer of bureaucracy that's sitting outside. That's sitting outside the. Basically, everything is going on, and they're sitting outside it and passing comments and not doing anything actively. And I think that has to change. So the answer to your question is yes, it all has to change.
Fair enough. Pratyasha, what do you think about the Women's Commission?
Firstly, special respect to Nayanika for calling KRK an actor. I mean, that took me but after that, beyond that, I think I pretty much agree with whatever she said. I'm still not clear what the NCW does, but irrespective, I feel the government, I would trust the government more to acknowledge, understand, and work on the issues of women than I would expect the civil society to. At least the longer lasting, more sustainable changes, irrespective of which government has been in power, has mostly come through government engagement and government understanding. And I feel though we don't talk enough to them, even sarpanches, bureaucrats, ministers get the pulse of what women are going through, at least in terms of basic problems, way better than somebody else with a degree might understand. But to what you asked, I think right now it's like a parking position for political appointees. Other than that, it's not doing much. So I wouldn't waste my breath in any form of activism for it, against it. We have a better opportunity at this point to talk about more proactive police reforms, better legislations, more empathetic policing, educating adolescents better. And I think if we have to direct our attention towards something, it should be more than revamping of this institutional body and put it in these directions.
All right. So it's time to wrap things up. But before I wrap things up, see, you know the drill. I always keep my comments to the end of the discussion, because the Shastrartha is not about me, but it's about the panelists. But I have to put my views on record. So these are my views. I'm only speaking on behalf of myself. These are not the views of the panelists. If you ask me what is the status of women in Northern India, this is what I look. I always say this line: Houston, we have a problem. Let's start with acknowledging the problem. If we don't acknowledge the problem, we can't even solve it. Now, as an Astic, and all the four women over here know that because I've asked them this question off the record a lot of times. I have never figured out why women are more religious than men. I have never figured it out. Maybe I'll never figure it out in my life. I don't know. But if you ask me, as someone who's read scriptures, then moved ahead of them, the scriptures have given women a raw deal. Yes, we can say different scriptures have given different religions give different women raw deal. Islam is more misogynistic. I'm willing to admit that. But yes, there is a problem in the scripture too. And there are many things that are wrong in our society. And if you on social media, you think and you know who you are, because I'm addressing this directly to you, the trolls who demean women. And this is not just a left-wing thing. This is especially existing in the right wing. This is especially existing in this so-called, I don't know, nonsensical traditionalist. पता नहीं traditionalism का ही नाम खराब कर दिया तुम बेशर्मों ने इस पूरे चक्कर में. Shame on you. If you can't talk to a woman properly, shame on you. If you can't respect a woman, shame on you. And if you can't accept, no society changes until we don't accept that there is a problem within us. If we don't accept that, अरे भाई मुझे मालूम है मुझे बुखार है और मैं डिनायलिज्म में रहूं कि मुझे बुखार है तो मैं दवाई नहीं लूंगा अगर मैं मानूं ही नहीं. If everything is so amazing about us, then why do the stats that Pratyasha shared, show the story? I think one more point I would have added, I don't know what the exact situation is right now. I think the workforce participation for women in India even today is around 26% or 24%. इतने बढ़िया है हम लोग तो 26% क्यों है? ये चीजें माननी पड़ेंगी. Look, I was raised in a house where I saw my mother working, taking care of the house, taking care of the children. My mom literally used to be like, I am in her arm, then she's cooking, then she's taking me and my brother to school. And I used to see that and I could never wrap my head around it. But today I realize how much my mother did for us. And maybe I am the way I am is because I saw such a strong woman in the house. Because I saw my mom doing all these things, working and taking care of us. But the point is, I think we have a long way to go as a society. And believe me, denying the problem is not going to solve the problem. And one more thing before I wrap things up. Oh yaar, apne standards thode high kar lo. I always give the example of cricket. अगर तुम्हारा comparison ही जिम्बाब्वे से होने वाला है कि देखो हम जिम्बाब्वे से तो अच्छे प्लेयर है ना, तो यार तुम लोग ही घटिया हो. फिर अपने आप को जिम्बाब्वे से कंपेयर मत करो यार. अपने आप को ऑस्ट्रेलिया से कंपेयर करो क्रिकेट में, अपने आप को इंग्लैंड से करो. जब हमने वो किया तब इंडिया अभी टेस्ट क्रिकेट में नंबर 1 टीम बनी है. अपने मतलब हम लोग अगर विमेंस राइट्स पे अपने आप को कंपेयर ही करने वाले पाकिस्तान से, वाह भाई वाह, क्या कंपैरिजन है. पाकिस्तान, हमारा स्टैंडर्ड अभी पाकिस्तान है. अभी एक काम करते हैं ना, सोमालिया से ही कंपेयर कर लेते हैं. वहां भी क्यों जाना, पाकिस्तान तो भी सोमालिया से बेटर होगा शायद. These are not your standards. You have to improve your standards. And I don't do this because I want to poke fun at people. My job when I started this series was I wanted to talk about issues that I don't know why the non-left refuses to talk about. Because they think we are living in some la-la land where everything is hunky-dory. You know that Sagarika Ghosh tweet where everybody is holding hands, everybody is hugging each other when Aam Aadmi Party won. I think that is the story we have created in our head, that everybody is holding hands, everybody is hugging each other. Oh ji, साढ़े करते कुछ हो ही नहीं रहा है, प्रॉब्लम है ही नहीं, सब कुछ बढ़िया है, प्रॉब्लम एक्सेप्ट करो. Are we as bad as we were in 1947? Hell no. Am I an optimist? I am actually, I could be accused of being an over-optimist because I belong to that back camp that keeps saying that, things are getting better daily and the data shows it. So things are getting better for women, but we have to set our standards higher. We can have a debate about which way is right. I definitely don't think third wave or whatever is coming right now in the form of feminism is right. I personally don't agree with it, but I definitely believe feminism has something to offer. I definitely believe, in fact, today a lot of my confusions around women and religiosity were accidentally clarified when I was listening to Pratyasha. I was like, okay, that's how they think, and that's how the spiritual aspect comes in. But my point is, as long as you guys have these discussions, we will solve these problems. So my request to everybody who's going to watch this later on or who's watched this right now, Start having these conversations on your dining tables, on your breakfast tables, with your friends at work, with your friends in the gym, especially men. Start having these conversations. And you don't like the tag feminist, mat lo wo tag. I don't need that tag, but we believe in equality, right? We believe in equal respect, right? We believe in those things. So on that term and on those notes, I want to end today's discussion. I want to thank all the four panelists. These are four women that I have tremendous respect for. I have learned a lot from them by following them on Twitter, by talking to them offline, by reading their work, by having many private conversations with them. And you know what? Once again, all four of you, thank you for coming and thank you for educating all of us. And guys, I will see you next time on another interesting discussion on Shastrartha. Until then, namaste, take care, goodbye.